Welcome back to Eat the Elephant, the series where, from at any point in your musical journey, you can learn more in a simple, easy, straight to the point way. This episode is episode 2 and is about accidentals and an intro to scales. In the previous episode, we talked about the white keys making up the alphabet, starting on C and ending on G, and then looping back around. So you'll never have anything that goes beyond G. You can start on A, you can start on B, but you'll never get an H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, or etc. You will only ever get A to G of the alphabet. And C to C, an octave up, which just means this would be C, and then this next one here with the same pattern of 2 black keys next to it with a break, and then 3. This white key here with the 2 black keys diagonal to it, that's C. So this C to this C make the same pitch, but the second one, the higher one, will have a little bit of a higher pitch, but it will make the same note and the same sound. So now we're going to talk about accidentals. And what this means is things that don't fall within the C major scale. What the C major scale is, we will talk about in this episode, a brief introduction to that, but we're going to talk about the black keys of the piano first. So I'm going to start off as usual by drawing a piano. That's a little poorly drawn, but that's okay. So here we have a piano. This note is C starting, and you can tell that at any given C on the piano. There are many Cs. But you can tell which C you're going to, and you can tell where C is based on you can find a white key and look diagonally, so up and to the right, and look at how many black keys are there, versus this note here. If you're on a C, there should be, if you look up and to the right, there should be 2 black keys, whereas if you start here, there'll be 3. So this is C, and this is F. Now, it's worth noting, if you're talking about a grand piano, that the C, the kind of home place, which would be C in most of music that you want to find, is middle C, which means in the whole thing, the C that falls in the middle. And on a grand piano, on a big piano, that will be right in the middle. On a keyboard at your home, just your own personal smaller instrument, it's probably going to be just off-centered to the left. But it'll be pretty close to the middle. So we're going to talk about the black keys. So the white keys are the alphabet, so C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then no H, so back to A. So, what about these black keys? The first thing that I'm going to tell you about this is that there are 2 things you can do to a pre-existing note. So let's take a note and do something to it. So there's one of 2 things you can do. Let's take C, because we've been talking about it so much, and you'll see why C is so important on piano if you don't already see it. So we'll take C. Now, there's 2 things that you can do to C. You can raise it or you can lower it. So if you raise it, you're sharpening the note. So if you see this symbol, which is a hashtag, next to a C, it means the C has been raised by some amount. We'll talk about what that amount is very shortly. And so this hashtag sign is a sharp. But you can also go the other way and lower that pitch, which would be this symbol, which is a lowercase b, and this is a flat. So if you see a C with a lowercase b next to it, that means that the C has been flattened or has been lowered in pitch. If you're writing musical notes, you'll always write them uppercase because this symbol for a flat looks like a lowercase b. You don't want to confuse your b's. You could have a B flat, for example, but you wouldn't want to mistake that for two B's, or a C flat could be mistaken as C and then B. It's a little bit confusing if you don't if you don't put your letters uppercase. So those are the two directions you can take with C. You can flatten the note or you can sharpen the note. By how much and what that means, we'll figure that out. But let's take this C here, and let's see what this is talking about here. So this C here, if you sharpen the note, you're going up to the nearest key. So this is not the nearest key because there's a key in between, if you can see that. So you go to the nearest key that's higher up from C. And then the other direction you can take is flattening it. But there's a little interesting thing that happens here. You have this little break where you have two white keys where there's no black key. And that actually happens twice. You have that here and you have that here. So what does that mean? Well, it means that C flat in this case. So this key here you could call C sharp because you're sharpening C up to that nearest key. But this key here, which we've called B, so F, G, A, B, could also be called C flat. So this key right here, we know it as B, but it could also be called C flat. So one thing that you can do is to write your flat a little bit smaller and above the C, but you can also write that right next to the C along with it, like that. So this is interesting because we have two names for this one key. And this presents not actually a problem. This presents a solution. It means that we can interchange these names depending on the context. And I will explain that right now. So, how much are we augmenting this note's pitch? And where's it going? Where's it heading? Why would you have two names for one key? Wouldn't that be confusing? Well, the short answer is yes, it is confusing. But the long answer is there is a purpose for either of these names. Let's look at what that purpose is. So, I'm going to tell you about something called a step. In North America, it's called a step. In the UK, it's called a tone. So you could call it a step or a tone. And this is a standard unit of measurement for the distance between notes, the pitch in between notes. But there's also a half step, which is also called a semitone. So let's look at an example of a step or a tone, which is actually normally called a whole tone. So a step or a whole tone is where you're jumping a distance of two keys. So if we talk about C here, if we sharpen C, we go to the nearest higher key. Whereas if we want to go a whole tone or a step up from C, we go two keys over. So 1, 2. So for the most part, with two exceptions, a white key to a white key is a step or a whole tone. So you have a step and a whole tone, and you have a half step and a semitone. So for the most part, this step or whole tone would be a white key to a white key. And I'll put a little arrow to make it, to show that that means a higher white key. Now, this, I'll put a little question mark next to it because this has an exception. If we look here, this has two exceptions actually. And this one here is an example of a white key to a black key. And I'll also put an arrow next to this because just in the same way, there are two exceptions. So let's take another note. Let's take F and do this same thing that we did to C here. So F, there's two directions you can take F. You can raise it, which is to say sharpen it, sharp. Or you can flatten it, which is to say lower it in pitch. And so let's take a look at what happens if we sharpen it. So F is right here. You go to the nearest key, which is this here black key. So this black key is called F sharp. Now let's flatten F. We go to the nearest key, it's this one. But we already know this key is C, D, E. So that means that this key has two names. So you can call this key E or F flat. And either is correct. So let me write this down here. So E or F flat. These two notes have the same exact pitch, but they are not used interchangeably. They're each used for their own purposes. So these are called enharmonic equivalents. Now that is a big term that sounds very confusing, but basically it's just a big word for these two notes sound the same, although they are used in different contexts. So there's a use for F flat and there's a use for E flat. Let's figure out what that means, where you'd use that. First of all, we know what a step or a tone is, and we know what a half step or a semitone is. So, let's see. Let's see the C major scale. So, I'm going to do something. I'm going to go through the C major scale, which is just this C here to this C. So if you play all the white keys from C to the next to the nearest C, you'll get the C major scale. A scale is a basis of notes that will make up whichever key you're playing in. So if you're playing the C major scale, you're in the key of C. And every note that falls in the C major scale can be played in a song that's in the key of C. So, if we start here on this C, we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, back to C. So, let's use these steps and half steps to figure out the intervals between the notes. So, starting on C, C to D, there is a black key in between, which means that we're jumping more than one key, more than one semitone, or half step, which means that we have a whole step, or whole tone. So this first one I'm going to write as a W. Now this thing that I'm going to be writing here will have a very important use that we will see just after I show it to you. So we're on D now. The first jump is a whole step. The next jump is from D to E. And there's a black key in between, which means that this is another jump of a whole step or whole tone. So I'm going to write another uppercase W. I don't know why uppercase, but, you know, there's a lot of things in music that are uppercase, like the notes and all that, so might as well. Okay, now the next one, E to F. There's no black key in between, which means this is going to the nearest key, which means that it's going up a half step. So this is a half step. And by the way, a half step, as you can see by the piano here, is the smallest interval in Western music. The smallest interval between notes is a half step in Western music. Now let's look. We're on F. We're going to G. There's a black key in between, which means that this is a whole step. We're on G. G to A. There's a black key in between, which means that it's another whole step. From A to B, there's a black key in between. This is another whole step. And finally, to get from B to C is another half step. Now, this right here is going to be a formula. Now, this is a major scale formula. So, I'm going to leave with that, and I'm going to start a new thing where I'm going to add a little question at the end of each video to see if you can do it. Now, if you're starting off, you probably can't, and it's okay. But the goal is to learn and to challenge yourself. So, here is my question. C to C, all white keys, which means that there's no flats or sharps in it. It means that C has no accidentals. But if I were to go from G to G, and I'll put a little arrow to mean that it's an octave up, i.e. the G major scale, how many sharps or flats there can only be in a major scale, either sharps or flats. So let's say the key of G has 7. It doesn't have 7, but let's say it has 7 sharps. They're all sharps, or 7 accidentals, I should say. They're all sharps or flats. They could have 7 flats, then it would be all flats. So how many sharps or flats does G have in it?